This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
Welcome back to Justice Pending. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan. And today we're going to Greenwich, Connecticut, but back in time to 1984 to revisit a case that still leaves a mark on the community: the murder of 13-year-old Matthew Margolies. This case came to us from a local Greenwich listener who, to this day, wants answers.
Yeah, this story has stayed with people for decades, not just because of the brutality of what happened, but because of who Matthew was and how suddenly the safety of a quiet New England town was shattered.
And while there are moments today where we're going to have to talk about hard, even disturbing details, we also want to remember Matthew for more than just the tragedy. He was a real kid, funny, outdoorsy, a bit stubborn, and overall deeply loved.
So let's set the scene. Greenwich in the 1980s wasn't what people picture now when they think of hedge funds and sprawling mansions. It was more of a working class pocket, tight-knit, where everyone knew everyone.
And in that neighborhood, Matthew was one of those kids everybody knew. He loved to fish. He loved being outdoors. He'd spend hours at the Byram River, not just for the thrill of catching trout, but because it was his happy place.
A lot of that came from his grandfather, George. Matthew idolized him. George taught him to fish, taught him the rhythm of the river, and from what neighbors have said, the two were almost inseparable.
But the summer of 1984 was different. George got sick, and it was fast. Matthew was only 13, but he stepped into this almost caretaker role, helping however he could. And eventually George passed, and that kind of loss does change a kid.
Yeah, and even in grief, it's been said that Matthew was the kind of kid who'd share his catch with his neighbors. People remember him knocking on doors to hand over fish, still wrapped in paper. And that's the Matthew that his family wants people to remember.
So let's go back to what happened on that fateful day. So Friday, August 31st, 1984. This is the last day anyone saw Matthew alive. He spent the night at his grandmother Stella's, and by mid-morning, he was at the Sparta Deli, a regular stop he had. He was buying a pastry and milk.
And this was the kind of deli where people lingered. They caught up on gossip. Matthew told someone that morning that the fish are really biting today, and he was planning on heading back out to the river.
So around lunchtime, he went home. His grandmother had to run errands, so she left him a note that said, "Get rid of the fish in the sink," which is one of those tiny, ordinary details that you could just picture.
Yeah, it's just a regular day in the life, right? Like he's doing all the things that he would do. I think it was a holiday weekend, like Labor Day weekend. And so just like long summer days, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's heartbreaking.
it's so sad because like we know what's coming next, right?
Yes.
We wouldn't be doing this story if it doesn't end in tragedy.
That's right.
So it's a little after 2 p.m. and Matthew is seen around the neighborhood. Then later, they think around 5:15 or 5:30, he goes back by that local deli. And then nothing.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was just an ordinary day. So his family did expect him home for dinner. And when he wasn't there by 7 p.m., they did start to panic. And by 9 p.m., his mom had called the police.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something worth thinking about because here we are, 1984. Even in Connecticut, missing kid cases don't get that much of attention, like an all-out response you'd expect today. But she called that same night. Just a few hours had passed since they hadn't seen him, and the search was on.
The first search started actually that night. So neighbors joined in, everything you'd expect, calling his name, checking the riverbanks. Police were combing the area on foot. They brought in dogs immediately.
Yeah, and they also brought in scuba divers for the river, like just in case. So, I mean, that tells you people were thinking about all the possibilities that, he'd slipped, maybe even drowned. That was the hope in those first hours that this was an accident and not something darker.
Yeah, it's not something you'd expect in the town,
Right.
in Greenwich. But then hope really started to fade because hours of searching turned into days of searching. And it was Labor Day weekend, so there were plenty of people around to help. But really, that whole neighborhood, the whole town was on edge.
Yeah. And so, going back, people have looked at this search and analyzed it, and they've noticed that they didn't hit certain spots early on, which is going to become important later as we talk about the timeline. They focused heavily on the river and the main, like, walking paths, but
Mhm.
some wooded areas didn't get searched for days.
Yeah. So eventually they do widen the search net. So 5 days later, again, this is 5 days later. These are days now. We're talking September 5th. There was a volunteer firefighter. He had actually been away for Labor Day weekend, came home and had, seen that while he was out, there was a child who went missing, and he wanted to help out and decided to check one of those spots that hadn't been searched. It was a steep hill near a riverbank. I believe it was also near like a series of stores, maybe like a little area with stores that he thought maybe teenagers would hang out.
Yeah.
And right behind that, but that was, it was thick with brush. It was hard to get to, and people just hadn't searched that area yet. So he had this gut feeling to go look.
Yeah, and he was right. The fact that he was drawn there ended up being really important because that's where they found a shallow grave. And Matthew's body had been partially buried under some dirt and sticks.
Yeah, I saw an interview later on with him that I forget what outlet he gave it to, but he's it's just the site has just haunted him, and he said, of course I'd do it again, but every time this comes up or new article or something
Yep.
brings the memory to mind, it's just one of those things that's just imprinted and it's really affected him for the rest of his days. But so he did call in the police right away, and the medical examiners findings, they were really hard to hear. So this is where it's going to get a little bit difficult. So he had been stabbed and a t-shirt was tied around his neck, and this is one of those details that still haunts investigators. Dirt had been forced into his mouth and throat. Just a detail that's horrible.
Yeah, it's awful. And this is a young child. This is a 13-year-old boy. And so this yeah, this is horrific. And so the cause of death was listed as asphyxiation due to obstruction of the airway, compounded by stab wounds. They also, they were able to tell that he'd been stabbed, but they think that the death was caused by not being able to breathe. And so there's talk that this was like a torture death. There's cruelty here, and it's really disturbing, and it starts to inform the suspect profile. Like, is this someone who knew Matthew? Is this someone who had something against him? Or is this like a sicko who wanted to torture a small child? Like, these are all the questions that investigators had in those early days.
Exactly. So police do start looking hard at the so-called Valley Boys. This was a group of teens who hung around the same deli, and they did sometimes harass younger kids.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to also just talk about the time period. Like,
Mm.
bullying today is really not tolerated. People call it out immediately. It's totally taken a turn, like, in our society, I think for the good, that people don't allow like these sort of schoolyard bullies to operate with impunity like they used to. You
Right.
just kind of leave it to the kids, right? So this is kind of the era of that, right? So they know that this group of teens harasses younger kids, but they haven't been stopped in the past, and people always kind of thought it was like the boys will be boys, to use the cliche. Um, but obviously, this is something that goes way beyond any type of normal bullying, if you can even call it that. And so police started looking at a specific kid who's called Charlie in reports. And, there's some conflicting accounts from this one particular boy. At one point, it's written that he gave a quote saying, we decided to ditch the little bastard. But there was no physical evidence that tied this Charlie to the scene, just like strange behavior and this sort of ominous quote.
Yeah, I mean, the police did even get the FBI involved. They developed a profile, likely a white male, local, low self-esteem, possible history of violence, maybe who's someone who resented Matthew. And that it does sound legitimate, but it was odd because Matthew seemed really liked by the entire community. So I imagine this was a hard profile to follow.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen reports where they at one point had like 8 persons of interest, and so I think quite a few of those are going to be the Valley Boys, and then probably like just like you talked about, other people in the area who had run-ins with the police and history of crime. Like those are the people that are going to get on the radar. There were some other leads, like neighbors who'd had arguments with Matthew over fishing spots. Could be nothing, but whenever you have someone turning up dead, you have to look at all disagreements for, something that seems little to someone might be a big deal to someone else. There was also a man who'd been seen loitering near the woods. But the case just kept hitting dead ends. It's honestly kind of reminding me of the West Memphis 3. That case, the 3 people that were eventually charged with the death of 3 8-year-olds, actually. So yeah, and a terrible crime out in the woods. It was in the 90s, this one. In Arkansas, but those people were actually later exonerated. So that's another justice pending case for another day, right, Susan?
Yeah, totally. I mean, all of this is so tragic.
It really is, yes. And also you think about this in an age before cell phones, before like Ring doorbell cameras, before lots of businesses had cameras. Like we're talking about the timeline that we have based on eyewitnesses and other evidence that they're able to gather, but we don't have like a digital trail because it's 1984.
Yeah,
so yeah,
it's allegedly a safe area, kids are out on
Right.
bikes, and you're not worried. I mean, it's you think maybe the neighbors are keeping an eye, or the deli manager or whoever, but it's not like an all hands on deck neighborhood watch situation
right.
Yeah, I mean, and so, fast forward, because the case went very cold.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 2020, attorney John Q. Kelly launches a podcast. It's called Murder, Greenwich on Edge, and it was re-examining this case with new eyes.
Yeah, so Kelly's team interviewed witnesses, they brought in forensic experts, they even explored hypnosis sessions done back in the day. And they're convinced that someone out there still knows more about what happened to Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, the hypnosis sessions interest me because, you can never, I feel like that does come up, and some people call it, it's like quackery and,
Right.
And so, but you've seen it work in a lot of cases.
I have, yeah. In the Eric Williams case, which was he was a former justice of the peace who ended up going rogue and murdering 3 people, and people had no idea who was committing these crimes, and they were searching for information. And an eyewitness who had seen one of the murders, the murder of Mark Hasse, had called 911, but was really frantic and felt like she couldn't remember as much as she should remember. And she was actually an attorney herself and a former police officer. And so she wanted to help as much as she could. And so she did hypnosis with the Texas Rangers in this case. This was like back in 2013.
Mhm.
And her name was Linda Bush. And she did hypnosis to try to remember what she saw when the gunshots went off and, as in the aftermath, because she was right there.
Mhm.
And she actually saw the killer like draw the gun and fire. And what was a key detail, she saw him leave in a getaway vehicle. And so through hypnosis, she was able to remember details about that car that she hadn't previously, had at the ready. And one of the details that she remembered was that there was this distinctive pattern going on the back of the car, and people didn't know like what that might be, if that was going to turn out to be real or not real. But later, when they recovered the car, it actually had cat tracks in
Huh.
the dust. Yeah, and so she had remembered this pattern, and it was real, and it was on the getaway vehicle, and it was something that was only drawn out through hypnosis.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it does work. I mean, the memories are there. It's just accessing them.
Yeah.
The
A lot
cra-
of times, yeah, people will do hypnosis like if they're the victim of a violent crime and they're trying to do a sketch.
Right.
And it has proved, very helpful in many investigations.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that they did it then. It seems like maybe you could even do it today, if police were up for it, because this is not that long ago. People are definitely still alive who were around
Right.
in 1984 in Greenwich. I mean, sure, the years have passed and memories fade, but perhaps it's something, worth looking at. Again.
Yeah, and like the trauma, whenever something traumatic happens to you, like there's a biological process that takes
Mhm.
place that helps preserve those memories, and you'll remember details more like surrounding a traumatic event through hypnosis and through other relaxation, techniques that can be drawn out than you would about just like a regular humdrum Tuesday morning.
Right.
It doesn't get ingrained in your brain, but there's an actual like chemical release. Like things happen whenever you have this type of event that's really unusual and causes a lot of adrenaline and stress. And
Mhm.
it's really interesting that those memories can still be accessed so many years later.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it feels like it's not over. I feel like we can get justice.
Yeah, and they've had a lot of leads. They've had people come forward with information. There was a case actually with a Dallas connection, if you can believe it.
Huh.
Yeah, like in the 2000s, there was this like child molester who got arrested and was connected like with some DNA evidence to some cold cases, and he actually had a connection to Connecticut. And so
Ooh,
they thought, oh my gosh, could this be Matthew Margolies, killer? And they
so-
have DNA from some of the evidence found on Matthew. They do have unknown suspect DNA. And so they were able to test that against this child molester in Dallas, but it was not a match.
wow.
So it was, yeah, like some false hope there. But
Mhm.
it's, encouraging to me that law enforcement continues to talk about this case, continues to have press releases, and people are not forgetting about Matthew.
Yeah. And it's still open. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, right, there's a reward, I believe, still active.
Yes. Yeah. So they, I think it's a $50,000 reward.
Oh,
And it's with the cold case unit of the Greenwich Police Department. And I think as more people learn about this, obviously I didn't know about it. I'm not from this part of the world, and so this case was new to me, thanks to our listener who recommended it to you. So
mhm.
I think the more people that talk about the case, the better chance that it doesn't, get forgotten and doesn't fall through the cracks. And that's really for victims' families who are trying to get justice for their loved ones. This type of attention is important because it keeps it in the conversation. When there's so many years go by, it can easily get lost.
Totally. And his mother would be now in her 70s and is still looking for answers. So if you are listening and know anything, no matter how small, you can call 203-622-3333 or email tips@Greenwich, that's GREENWICHCT for Connecticut.org.
So thanks for listening to this episode of Justice Pending. We'll be back next week with an all-new case. But until then, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep asking hard questions. Justice Pending is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Rebel Studios. It's hosted by me, Claire Sanama, and Susan Passoni. Our theme music is Bending Truth, licensed at premiumbeat.com. We appreciate all listener feedback. Leave a review wherever you're listening right now, and we might read it on the air. Thanks for joining us.